recording started. Welcome to NOPBC Fabulous Fridays. We have Chancey Fleet, the president of the NFB Assistive Technology Trainers Division, and Jack Menendez, uh, technology trainer at Louisiana Center for the Blind. We also have Georgie Sidner and I think Melissa also uh, presenting. I'm not sure, so I'm going to be quiet now. And Georgie, would you finish the introductions and make everything go?
Of course. I love making things go. So, hi, I'm Georgie. Currently a student at Louisiana Tech, becoming a teacher of blind students, which, if you're a parent out there, is very, very similar to a teacher of the visually impaired or a vision teacher. And yeah, we're all here today to talk about note takers, braille displays, and how our kids need them and how our kids are going to use them. And it's really for mostly parents and teachers of young kids, but anybody, since we're recording this, anybody who wants to listen in, I'm sure there's a lot you can learn. So we've got Chancey and Jack, who are both braille display note taker pros, and they're going to share with us some of their thoughts on displays and note takers. So do you want to start off, Chancey?
Sure. Hey, hello. My name is Chancey Fleet. I am the Assistive Technology Coordinator at the New York Public Library, Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library branch, longest branch name ever. And so I coordinate individual one-on-one technology coaching and group workshops at our library, and we work with both adults and youth. And I also identify as blind, and I have been a Braille display user for a pretty long time. I think I ran across my first Braille display when I was in middle school, in 8th grade, when I went to the Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind for a couple of years, and I became a full-time Braille display user as a freshman in college. And Braille display is a really important part of my toolkit. So what I'll be sharing with you today, after Jack has a chance to introduce himself, I really want to be able to talk about why Braille displays need to be introduced, why Braille digital technology is relevant when we have so much other technology out there, some of the applications of Braille displays, and then things to think about when you're choosing which Braille display or full-featured Braille note taker you or your child is going to use. Do we want to introduce Jack, maybe?
Sure, I can do that. Hi, I am Jack Mendez. I'm Director of Technology at Louisiana Center for the Blind, and I, like Chancey, use Braille displays very actively in my work and my home life. I've been a Braille user for quite some time, both as a software developer and as just a general user. And what I want to talk about is the decision-making process and some thoughts around helping you as a parent or a student determine where Braille might be useful to you in applications where you might not think about.
Okay, great. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, inevitably when you work with your IEP team at a lot of schools, you might get pushback on having a Braille display available for your child or your teen. And if you're an adult, vocational rehabilitation student, or an adult in an employment situation, you might get that same pushback about a Braille display. We have digital technology. We have iPhones and Android phones and screen readers. Why is it so necessary to have a Braille display? And I wanted to put a few things out there from my work with my patrons, both youth and adults, and from my personal life. One, when you set out to acquire Braille technology, it's really important to go in with a clear head, whether it's for someone you're supporting or yourself, and have a really solid justification. And so if you spend some time thinking about all the applications where Braille displays make a big difference to success, I think you'll be better equipped to get the Braille display that you need. So Braille displays, if you are learning to read, or if you're learning to read in a new way, so for me that might mean learning Spanish, it might mean learning mathematics, musical notation, or code, or even learning to understand a new word that I haven't seen before and don't know how to pronounce. In all those situations when you're encountering new content, Braille displays provide you the wonderful precision of knowing letter by letter, symbol by symbol, what it is that you're coming across. When you listen to something like a line of code or a mathematical equation or something in another language or an unfamiliar word, using your screen reader with text-to-speech, you have to move letter by letter to really parse that out. Whereas with a Braille display, you have immediate access, and you can review it as many times as you like, and you can say it out loud, and you can copy it easily, and it just provides you this wonderful precision. So I think for early readers, and we'll talk more about early readers later, I think Jordy and Melissa will. For early readers and people encountering new things, Braille displays are so important. One of my favorite things to do with early Braille readers who might be using Braille and text-to-speech in conjunction is if they come across something they don't recognize in Braille and they're using it with a screen reader, like a digital Braille display or a note taker, they can read the Braille and have their text-to-speech, their screen reader, also read the word out loud. So it kind of lets you have the best of both worlds. Maybe you're going to skim something with text-to-speech, but when you find what you're looking for, you're going to zero in and read the line in Braille. Or maybe you're going to read something in Braille and you're having a hard time with a line. You might try that line out with text-to-speech. Braille is important in a lot of other contexts, though. From the early grades all the way through career, it's really important that we be able to present on, I just almost said present online because I'm in Zoom world now, but present out loud, or do public speaking, or do class projects, group projects where you have to refer to your notes, maybe you have to refer to PowerPoint slides, and in all those situations, having Braille under your fingertips is so important. If you want to be able to take notes subtly and silently, having Braille is important. If you want to be able to read to a friend or a sibling or your child, Braille is so important. And so I think having a Braille display is no more negotiable for our kids and teens and adults who are blind than it is negotiable for a sighted person to have a screen. And I think having that justification ready to go is one of the most important things that we can do as we enter into the assessment and acquisition process. Jack, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, you mentioned quite a few of the uses I had planned to talk about, but one other scenario that I can mention from my own life is we were building array microphones from elements and using in the field to capture fireware recordings, and I had to refer to technical documents to look at the frequency ranges and what they called the reflection parameters when you build these array microphones. And without Braille, I really would have had a very difficult time conveying those precise details to the students under my supervision, because otherwise I would have been using text-to-speech, and I could have done that, but it was much easier to deal with that when you're having to convey information with precision.
Yeah, in my experience, anytime something is kind of a cognitive lift, so for me it's origami models. I like to take notes and learn to do origami, and boy is it hard for me to parse that stuff with text-to-speech, but if I can do it one line at a time with Braille, it makes such a big difference. And I forgot to mention one that's obvious, which is proofreading. You know, we've got spell check and grammar check, but we all know it makes mistakes. We have dictation, but boy do we know that makes mistakes. So just being able to proofread your own work, or be a great help to someone else and proofread their work, finding those little punctuation issues and sound alikes and spaces, proofreading is so important. So now we know why we need a Braille display. Jack, do you want to start us off with, so usually when I talk about this, I start by talking about the difference between standalone Braille displays and like quote-unquote full-featured note takers, and then I go into like criteria for choosing one. Do you want to start out there and I'll chime in this time?
Happy to do that.
Cool.
So when we talk about the two Braille display or note taker, the biggest difference really in my mind is how you intend on using the device. So a Braille display and a note taker can seem like they do similar things, but they're very different because of the form factor, for one. And form factor is just a fancy word for the dimensions of the device, all those sorts of things, the ergonomics, and then what the device can do. So note takers have a proprietary operating system, um, or and also
Proprietary-ish, right? So like lately
ish.
it's Android or it's Windows, but it's usually got some customizations that are supposed to make things easier.
Yeah, there's the particularly on the humanware products, there's so much modification given the overlay. I would say um, I'm less happy with ish and more happy to stay because the spirit is there, open source, all that adoption. But I in a lot of ways, there's a lot of drift, especially if you start. We're going to get a little geeky here, but especially if you get apps that are outside Google Play, it really tends
Yeah.
to drop off.
Can I roll
Um,
it back to like a way less technical place for a second, and
yeah,
just
yeah,
in
yeah,
case some people haven't heard these concepts before at all?
yeah, yeah.
So basically, guys, a braille display is, it could just be refreshable braille and braille input without a whole lot of extra features, without a whole lot of its own brain, if you will, or operating system, if you will. And it gets its power just like a keyboard and a screen get their power from being connected to something else. So a braille display you might connect to your iPhone, your Android device, your Mac, your PC. Braille displays that don't have much of their own brain tend to be smaller. They tend to be less expensive than quote unquote full-fledged note takers. They tend to require fewer software updates, and they tend to connect to more than one Bluetooth device or USB device. So that's the pro on those. Then there are some braille displays that are somewhere in the middle, and personally I love the ones that are somewhere in the middle. I happen to use a Q Braille. Before that I used a Vario Ultra, which is no longer being made. I've used a Braille Edge. And so some Braille displays aren't full-featured note takers running a full operating system, but they have some not internet-connected tools that you can use when they're not connected to another device. So for example, my Q Braille or a Braille Edge has a notepad, so you can do basic reading and writing. A book reader, mine happens to have a Daisy reader. Some of them have a basic calendar, not one where you can collaborate with other folks, but just to keep yourself straight. Basic time, basic stopwatch, basic calculator, things like that. And then in addition, to do other things, to be cloud connected, to be online, they connect as a screen and keyboard would connect to some other digital device. I really love this category. They're still usually not as expensive as note takers. They tend to last a long time on charge. They tend not to need really frequent software updates. But when I'm writing or reading or giving a speech, I really don't want to be connected to the internet because I don't like surprises and I don't like distractions. I like to be in kind of a walled garden, if you will, doing the simple things that I do in terms of reading or writing without a lot of interruptions. And also, if you're in an exam or testing situation, these devices give you the peace of mind that you know you can have them and they can do basic things for you. They can load Word documents and they can let you save Braille documents from a USB or a flash drive, depending on what the device is. And you know that you can have a testing situation or a non-distracted writing situation where you're not connected to the internet. And then full-fledged Braille note takers, and you'll hear, Braille note taker, or sometimes once in a while you'll hear Braille tablet. There's the Polaris from HIMS, and that one runs a modified version of Android that's all reliant on Braille chords, and it has a teeny weeny little LCD screen and no touch screen. There is the L Braille from, what are they right now? The Sparrow. That runs Windows 10, and it's a Focus 40 Braille display strapped into a purpose-built computer that they call the L Braille. And it's a pretty unmodified version of Windows 10 with a special just-in-case restart and a small suite of very simple apps like a notepad and a couple of other things that you can use kind of separate from Windows 10. And then we have the Braille Note Touch Plus out from Humanware. That is a modified version of Android. I think that are they on Android P? I think they're on Android P.
I think they just moved.
Yeah. And so and that one has a touchscreen tablet, so you can type Braille on the touchscreen, and you could also use the touchscreen to explore as you would with a standard Android tablet using talkback gestures. So those are pretty. That one comes closest to a full Android experience, but it is always going to be maybe one or two Android versions behind. And the good thing about these, in my mind, is they provide increased Braille support. So they do both Polaris and L Braille and Braille Note Touch do a lot to make the Braille translation experience really seamless and let you use contracted Braille in lots of places. The Polaris and Braille Note Touch notably provide improved support for mathematical Braille. But the thing is, because the modifications are so heavy, they do have a tendency to fall behind the industry pretty quickly, and that's just a trend in the industry. So they might give you in the early years, the early grades, more ease of use and more stability when you're using Braille. They're also smaller than using in combination with a full-fledged tablet, and they're also pretty instant on in comparison to a full-fledged tablet, but they are super more expensive, and they are going to tend to lag and have certain divergence from mainstream operating systems.
Yeah, my favorite are the middle road devices as well, Chansey. And I would say too that in terms of smaller, you can get some incredibly light computers. In fact, my own setup with a Braille display and a very thin laptop is lighter in weight than the Braille Note Touch Plus. It's not quite as light as the Polaris. That's sort of a unique piece there. But in terms of weight and speed, now you do have to pay for the specs on a laptop. But in terms of instant on, if you configure it right, it's just as fast or faster, especially with the modern devices. I would say that the Apex and the Braille Sense products were closer to that instant on experience that you referred to, because I don't get that with either the Polaris or the. No, I don't have the Plus.
That still takes a while to charge up, not to charge up, but to power up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So that was my experience with those.
So we probably want to go through all the kind of nuts and bolts of things that you might pay attention to in an assessment. But maybe before we do that, should we take some questions if there are any? Going once? Going twice? Okay, I think we can go on. So I have a whole laundry list of things that I like to tell people to look out for when they're doing an assessment. But what I want to say first and foremost is this is a big decision. I like to compare it to buying, it's not as expensive as a car, but it is as expensive as a really good mattress. And like a mattress, you might be using it for the next 5 to 10 years. So you really have to think hard about it. So, we're in a pandemic right now and things are a little different, but generally speaking, what I say is please don't make a buying decision until you've had your hands on the product. That might mean going to the National Federation of the Blind exhibit hall or our International Braille and Technology Center or some other place where there's lots of different kinds of Braille displays to get your hands on. And if you have kids love those types of field trips and it's really useful. If not, you can usually get dealer representatives to come to your home or your school and do demos. And when they do demos, make sure that your child or teen, or if it's you yourself as an adult, have a chance to work with the device hands-on and really put it through its paces. And when you do make a purchase, make sure you understand a few things. Make sure you understand what the return policy is, how long you have to make sure you're satisfied, and what that window is within which you have to send something back if there's something you discover that you really don't like. You also want to make sure that you really understand what the warranty is. How much is the warranty? Exactly what does it cover? What doesn't it cover? When repairs need to be made, where does the device go? What's the turnaround time going to be for the device to come back? Is there a loaner program so that you're not left without Braille while your device is being repaired? And just really understand maintenance and upkeep, because as much as we want to think about these devices performing at their best, we also really have to think about what happens when they don't. What do you have to add to that, Jack?
For Braille displays and note takers, remember too that they do require cleaning, and generally
Yes.
the companies do offer a cleaning service, and particularly if you're in a school setting, I recommend that you try and take advantage of holiday breaks to do that. And just schedule it into the maintenance part of your scenario and build that into whatever fee structure you have for maintaining the technology, and that can be a part of the process for IEP as well, talking about those expenses.
That's right. So I like to think about size and ergonomics. So braille displays can be as small as, I think the smallest I've ever seen, there's one that's 10 cells. I'm not sure I would recommend that for most educational uses. There are small braille displays that are 14, 18, or 20 cells in length. Be aware that the shorter your line is, the more often you're going to have to press the pan button. However, some people do find that when they're working on a shorter line, they like it because they don't have to move their hands or arms as much. They can just kind of access the braille under their fingers without a whole lot of movement. But I would say for education, where we're really looking at mathematics and code and proofreading and and full-length books, you know, what my heart tells me, you should do your assessment and you should make your own choice. But what my heart tells me for education is that a 32 or a 40 cell is good, because if you're reading a lot of textbooks and you're building up braille proficiency and building up speed and you're doing proofreading, I really think it's advantageous to have a traditional full line. Jack, what do you think about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. 32 is the minimum. I can't. There are smaller displays, and I actually have a couple of those smaller displays, and I do use them if I am truly in need of a compact solution. But for someone reading and learning, you really need to have as much braille under your fingers for as long as possible.
I think that's right. So most braille displays have cursor routers, and a cursor router is just a little tiny key above the braille cell, and when you touch that tiny key, the cursor goes right there, and it's immensely helpful with proofreading and also selecting text. There are a couple braille displays out on the market that don't have cursor routers. I would say for educational uses, steer clear, because being able to route your cursor to where you need it for selecting text or proofreading is really important. Another thing we have to keep in mind is ergonomics. No two braille keyboards are created equal. I really love my Q braille keyboard because it has a deep travel. It really feels like I'm typing. It's not the quietest or the loudest, but it feels really solid to me. The Focus 40 braille display keyboard is a much lighter touch. You don't have to put as much pressure on it to get the keys to move. I think the Orbit reader has a little bit of a firmer key. The Brilliant series has easy travel, but it's like a shallower key bed. And then the new Mantis out from APH, that actually has a QWERTY keyboard. So if you have someone that prefers to type using a QWERTY keyboard, maybe they're a dual media learner and maybe they've experienced vision loss later on and they are just already a really good typist, they might enjoy using a QWERTY keyboard, although that whole conversation about whether develop braille typing skills over typing skills is definitely one to have with your advisors and your IEP team. But the point is, get your fingers on the keyboard, or get your kids' fingers on the keyboard before you make a decision, because there's nothing worse than going through life with an uncomfortable keyboard. You also want to be aware that the key that you're going to press more than any is the panning key. So there's usually a forward panning key that goes to the next braille line and a back panning key that goes to the previous braille line. Sometimes, like on the Brilliant and the Braille Note Touch and the Focus, those panning keys are on the front, and they're sometimes called thumb keys. And sometimes they're small, or like on the Focus, they're prominent but pretty small. On the Braille Note Touch, they're pretty large. So your thumbs are advancing, and your fingers don't really have to move from the display. Others have their panning keys on the side. My Q Braille or a Braille Edge has those panning keys on the side, so my pinkies tend to hit them. So just being aware of those panning keys and how you're going to press them hundreds or thousands of times a day, and make sure you're comfortable with where they're located and that the reading technique really works for you. So that's what I have to say about ergonomics. What do you have to say about them, Jack?
Yeah, you've done a pretty comprehensive job. One thing too to keep in mind with Braille displays particularly is you can customize your experience for what those keys do
Oh yeah.
on most of the platforms. And so that's why it's important to try to think about what you're going to be doing mostly. And then if you find that, particularly with a display, that whatever the manufacturer has set out for you isn't working, know that you can change that and make it better. Um, the spacebar positioning also can really matter. So,
Oh yeah.
you can also use your thumb for that. And I can tell you that um, the brilliant products for me, the spacebar is pretty flush with that edge, and I find it to be problematic. I like a spacebar that sticks out a little further.
I know what you
Just
mean.
makes it more efficient for me. So definitely pay attention to the space bar, and then um, if you're considering like the Orbit products, the the panning buttons are definitely further away, and that can really cause you to lose speed.
Where are they on the orbit?
They are on the very far left and right corners,
Oh, okay.
um, and so that's
And
that
that's where
you
they
have.
are on the Q Braille, right on the. They're flanking the Braille display.
Are they? But is it? Can you reach easily if you're brailing? I find it to be a reach
For
on the Orbit
me,
with
I haven't
the.
checked out the orbit in a
Okay,
while.
yeah.
I
The
think I
the Q
vaguely
Braille
remember that
is
though.
good. I like the reach for the Q Braille is good.
Yeah. But the bottom line is like there's no hard and fast right or wrong unless you just don't put your hands on it before you purchase. Really, seriously, whatever you do, make sure that you take things for a test drive. And that doesn't just mean typing for 5 minutes. Like maybe an hour of experimentation might be enough. A quick pass in the exhibit hall, I think, doesn't do it. So I think if you can work with your local dealers, believe me, they want the sale. They'll do home visits, they'll do school visits. It pays to really test things out before you make a commitment. It's kind of like a bicycle. You would make a serious decision about buying a nice bicycle or a nice mattress. You really want to take that time. I would also, Jack, I've been talking a lot. Do you want to talk a little bit about specs and how specs impact things like processor and storage and all that jazz?
I can do that. Yeah, I would also add to the experience. Once you get it home, you have to use it. Like I see so many times where you get excited about a product. This is for me and also for others making decisions. You get it home, you encounter a problem, you put it down, I'll get back to it later, whatever. Um, you got to commit to using it. And that's why I mentioned the configurability portion of this, because sometimes it can feel like whatever challenge we're having with a device makes that device unusable for absolutely everything, and that just isn't true. You got to give it a chance. So specs for note-taking devices, the CPU and built-in memory and connectivity options are going to be important to look at. Um, you're going to have all the devices, whether you're choosing a note taker or a display, have both wired and wired wireless options. So for your note takers, they'll have Bluetooth and USB as well as the Braille display options. So your CPUs are going to be the Qualcomm types usually, and you can't really pick. So you get what you get, and storage. I think also I don't believe you can upgrade those, with the exception of adding like a micro SD card. Um, and the hybrid devices, or the not the hybrid devices, but the devices that we talked about, those middle range devices, also do happen to support adding storage. They come with an SD card in there, and the sizes do vary. You do have to check the specifications. The specs will tell you what the maximum capacity of SD storage would be on the individual devices. But I can tell you that even if you got like an 8 GB card, that's a lot of Braille, truly. I mean,
Oh
that
yeah.
is that. I mean, even a 4 GB, that's tons and tons and tons of Braille, tons of books, tons of notes. Um, and so, and for the note-taking devices, they also tend to have additional USB ports, so you can plug in USB flash drives. And for all those connected, internet-connected devices, they also can support downloading content from cloud services. And the one of the things that will affect battery life is going to be that processor. So when we think about a student that does need to be mobile all day long, I would argue that maintaining a straight braille display is a little bit easier uh, in terms of your battery because there's not all that other brains in it.
Yeah, I find that well, it's not hard and fast because my Vario Ultra had a small battery, but I do find that I get a long battery life out of my Q-Braille. And the Brilliant and Focus 40 also have really long battery lives because they're not connected to the internet, and that seems to dramatically cut down on battery use. Cloud connected devices are always checking in. When they're on, they're checking for notifications in the background. There are push notifications. The demands on the processor are higher. If they have a screen, then it's taking battery to power that screen. So I really enjoy the longer battery life on the simpler devices. So I have about 9 more minutes on, and then I know at 4:40, Georgie and I think Melissa are going to talk about specifically considerations for education, for introducing a Braille display. When do we introduce it? What kind of activities do we have? So while I'm still here, can we open it up for questions? Do our moderators or anyone else have questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Would you say, what recommendations do you have for thinking of parents listening back to this, where places they can get information about the different displays and note takers? Because I know we've mentioned just a ton of them in passing today, and we've talked about how they're all very different and they have these different features. But is there a place where they can read up on them and like really get that information?
Oh yeah. So the NFB has a technology answer line at 410-659-9314. It's one of the extensions. I also recommend where did I go? I'm sorry, we've got an answer line. Sometimes there are reviews in the Braille Monitor, and we have an Access Technology blog. Plus, when you come to convention, outside the Parents Division, if you would come to some of the showcase sessions that different vendors have. I know most of the major vendors are going to have showcase sessions where they go really in depth about the advantages of their products and what their products can do. I also think it's really important to network in the community. So for example, there is on Facebook an Assistive Technology for the Blind and Visually Impaired group. There is a TVI and O&M group. And you can ping those groups and find users and really pick people's brains about what their experiences have been with the pros and cons of a device. You can try AFB Access World at afb.org/AW. They're really good about doing reviews for new products when those products come out. And of course, the developers and vendors themselves have lots of specifications, YouTube videos, free webinars, all that stuff on their websites. And although, of course, they're not going to be totally objective, just like when you would go to a car dealership to see about a car, you can visit all of the websites, do a lot of reading, do a lot of comparison, so that when you do come onto the hands-on the hands-on portion of your buying process, you know what questions to ask and you know what you're watching out for.
And then you got to kick the tires to keep the car.
Yes.
You really, really got to. I mean, truly, no matter what anybody else tells you, depending on, even for your students, a lot of times they've got to get it into their space and commit to using it for particular tasks and get good at whatever it is that they're doing, because people get frustrated, including myself, when I'm using a new technology and then I say, well, what I used to do was so much faster. And yes, that's true a lot of times because we're used to doing it. And so it's
Exactly.
really key that whatever device you pick, you got to give it time.
Absolutely.
And this is
I do
Melissa,
have,
and I would just echo that, and I would also I would say that you want to be careful, especially with kids, that you're not getting something. Sometimes you get something for one specific feature, but it turns out to be way more of a tool than you actually need. So, for example, we picked um, kind of blindly, no pun intended, a Braille Note Touch for our daughter a little while back because the school uses Chromebooks and uses Google Documents. And we just thought, okay, that's going to be the best. That was kind of what we heard. That's going to be the best thing for Google Documents and this and that. And it turned out that she and I both, I'm a blind parent, and I had been a HumanWare user before and really liked their interfaces. And I just found the Braille Note Touch itself. Now they do have the Braille Note Touch Plus, so and different strokes for different folks. But I found the Braille Note Touch very clunky, very unuser friendly, and it just had way more bells and whistles than my daughter really needed. And so what we're hoping to do next year, and I've actually gotten my hands on, and we've both gotten our hands on a Q Braille, and I think that hooked up to a laptop is going to be a much better tool for her. It's kind of one of those middle of the road. The thing I like particularly about the Q Braille is that it also has the function keys. So
Yes.
Alt F4 on a computer is how you get out of things. Alt F4 is also how you can get out of things on a Q Braille. And I think just learning those function keys right from the start with your display and your keyboard is a really nice idea and just gives you a lot of versatility. So just be careful not to just pick what your school has, or if your school says, well, we have this or that, it might be old, it might be out of date. I mean, really do that research. And often your teachers of blind students don't know the new technology. Our teacher of blind students is telling me, please give me information about the Q Braille. I've never heard about the Q Braille. And I mean, it's been out for a while. Like, I don't know why she hasn't heard of it, but just don't pick something for one feature. Really look at everything and also ask questions about, okay, so here's the deal. We need to be able to get it. What's really the best way to do that? And by the way, the Braille Note Plus might be better, but the touch itself, it never really worked with the school's firewall or whatever. We could never really get it to work where she could access it the way that we wanted her to be able to. So just be aware of that and ask those questions, get your hand, and also know that the dealers are going to obviously be out to sell their products. And so they will make it sound like the best ever. So make sure that you have other people that you can probably something that your child or you will be having for a long time, and getting one that you don't like, it makes it very hard to learn it, because if you really don't like it off the bat, sometimes you can never really get over that, even if you want to. It's just like that, I got to work with this silly thing again, and it never works the right way, and I can't figure it out. So.
yeah, I mean, I can pretty much say here, there's pretty much no reason to choose a note taker these days. Pretty much. I mean, yeah, there's the math advantages. I get that.
Braille Note Touch,
Yep.
Just
Yep.
saying.
And that's why I say pretty much.
I mean,
Okay.
let me just give note takers their due. So note takers do often have enhanced cording systems so that within a range of tasks you can do things mighty fast, probably faster than you could in a lot of mainstream operating systems. So particularly for people who are in their earlier grades, where the most important thing is for them to learn reading comprehension, proofreading, responding to an assignment, and they're okay to be in kind of a walled garden that's not quite the same environment that everyone else is using, and they're not doing like real-time document collaboration, and there are a lot of things that they're not doing, but they really need an excellent book reader, and they really need world-class Braille editing tools that don't freak out about contractions. and they need a very good help structure and tutorial structure. And yes, Nemeth. I think for early grade, and in some cases later, there is a case for note takers. I think note takers let you do a certain subset of things very fast and very conveniently. They are purpose built for the Braille coding system to take advantage of commands. For example, it can be much easier to select big chunks of text. The Braille and speech are much more cleanly integrated to work together without a whole bunch of bugs. So I really think that there is a place for note takers in the assessment process and in the decision process. However, I hear what Jack is saying, and I think when I've seen high school and college students who live in note taker world and are not simultaneously comfortable with laptops and mainstream web browsers and using mainstream collaboration tools, they can do a subset of things, but when they're asked to collaborate in a college or an office environment, they kind of struggle because they're used to doing things in this very curated way. And I would say if you do have a note taker for a student, it's really important to commit to having that student in parallel using that note taker as a Braille display with a mainstream laptop and a mainstream tablet, because we have to have mainstream workflow confidence so that we can integrate into whatever environment where we find ourselves.
Yeah, I completely agree with Chancey. I think the interactive, once students are getting to the grades where they need to, especially nowadays, you've got a lot of Chromebooks and iPads in the schools, when their classmates are doing things on Google Docs, that's when what Jack says comes into play. That's when the display is going to really let them be on par and not just in their own separate but equal, maybe not always so equal playing field with their note taker. So it really does come down to the age of, are they learning the Braille? Do they kind of need to be in this world where it's all kind of geared for Braille, or do they need to be interacting, collaborating with peers and sighted people?
Thanks for having me, Georgie. Georgie,
Yeah.
I've got to scoot.
Yeah, no problem.
Great.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
It's been awesome. All right. Oh, so much sound change. Okay.
And And I would say too, Georgie, I think you make a really good point, and Chancey does too. I would say, especially if you're pairing a Braille display with an iPad, a cell phone even, you probably don't need a note taker in the same way that you used to. You know, it used to be that smartphones weren't really accessible. So the note taker was like the BlackBerry for blind people when BlackBerry wasn't accessible. You know, we had our calendar, we had our alarm clock, we had a stopwatch, we had a calculator, you know, we had email, we had everything kind of right there at our fingertip. I mostly use my Braille display on my phone because I have my calendar on my phone, I have my email on my phone, I can switch back and forth really easily between my phone and my dock. Just, you know, especially for a person who is a little bit older and who might have a smartphone and might want to start to text or email or do Facebook or things like that that are appropriate. The Braille display can really make navigating a phone, especially certain things on a phone, easier to do, and might also just you know, make it more exciting or more possible for them to text or to do things. I like my Braille display because I can text in a meeting very, you know, I don't have to have my speech on. I can just turn the speech off, do whatever I'm in the meeting. So, but again, that's kind of a problem because right now I don't have kind of a standalone quick note-taking type option. So I have to get the Notes app up on my phone and connect my and this and that. So really what I'd like to do when I upgrade is get one of those middle of the road. So I don't have every single thing that's needed that's in a note taker, but I have enough that I can just quickly turn it on and write a quick note to myself to do something and then turn it back off and go on with my day. So just another thing to think of, that, you know, so much has changed now since note takers came out. And really note takers were the things that, it was really blind people that were kind of the trendsetters in a lot of these. Now, obviously, the sighted people said, oh, wow, that's a good idea. And so they stole them from us.
Yeah, and made them less accessible. But no, totally. I think it's changed so much. Like Jack, you were talking before about the whole instant on thing. That used to be such a positive. That's like a great example of what Melissa's talking about. That used to be such a positive thing about the note takers. They turned on faster than anything, faster than a laptop. It was just like taking out a piece of paper. It really did feel like when I was in 4th grade and I had my Empower, I was the fastest person in the room. I was faster than every sighted kid in that room, you know, and I could, when we'd read the books, I could search for the parts, and I could, you know, we'd work on group projects and I would be like, oh, I found the quote you guys are looking for in 2 seconds. Here it is. It's on page 18. You know, it was great, but they really have, they've changed, especially the standalone ones. They've changed a lot, and they don't have things like instant on anymore. They've gotten, I mean, like Melissa said, I think a lot of people find them, especially people who remember how they used to be, find the newer ones a bit clunky and are kind of becoming a lot more pro display. Whereas in the past, we were the blind community, we were the note taker advocates. We're very for them before.
Absolutely. I remember having a Braille and Speak. That goes back before you were born, Georgie. And
I'm young.
boy, I loved that. I loved that device. You know,
Not
the
before I
Braille.
was born, Jack. I had one too. I
That's
took it to
right.
college and I loved it. Yep.
Awesomeness. Yes.
Yep.
So
Anyway.
so
And then I got a
mean,
Braille light, and
yep.
then it had a Braille display. It was like the coolest thing ever.
Yep, absolutely,
But
yes.
yes.
And so I appreciate the note taker form factor, but I think that for today's students, and I say this to everybody, I don't hold back. For today's students, in some ways, I think that for learning Braille, yeah, honestly, it would be better to work with paper initially, like hard copy Braille, than one of these note-taking devices, just because it adds so much complexity. That's my view, though.
Yeah, learning Braille too. When you're a young kid learning Braille, you're also still learning things. I mean, you're learning basic literacy skills. So you really don't want them starting off reading on a device that gives them one line at a time, because they're never then confronted with dealing with a page worth of Braille and having to read up and down, left and right, and finding their place and finding their line and finding indented paragraphs and reading tables of text contents.
And I think that's a great point. And there's certain things that I still love in hard copy Braille. I always say that National Convention, I don't know what I'm going to do this year because everything's going to be probably electronic. But in the past, I always say National Convention doesn't start for me until I get a Braille agenda in my hands. Because for an agenda, I just want that ease of, okay, there's the next day, there's the, I don't know, skimming it. Same as a restaurant menu. Yeah, it's great to have it electronically on my phone or whatever, but if a restaurant has a Braille menu, I'm going to choose it every time, because that hard copy Braille is just right there under my fingers. And just like you can skim print, you can skim Braille, and students do need to learn how to do those types of things. So I think that's a really important, and I guess, that really brings us up to another good topic. And I know that in our National Organization of Blind Children workshops at convention, we are going to talk about Braille embossers and how important it is for kids, especially during this time with the pandemic, to have a Braille embosser at home. So often that's not even heard of. Schools will look, we're really going to help you make the case of why that's so important. Sighted kids can go and on a printer, even if they don't have one at home, they can go to a library often. Maybe not now because of the pandemic, but you can often get a printer. You could go to a friend's house maybe and get access to a printer. If you're a blind kid, and especially if you don't have a play, and especially if you're a new reader or you just like that Braille, I know Chancey was talking about not wanting when she is connected to the internet, which makes complete sense to me. I don't even like to give a speech necessarily on my Braille display if I can help it. I would much rather have hard copy Braille underneath my fingers. It's so much better for me. And so that's really why you should think about, if you have a blind child, getting a Braille embosser in your home, having that set up so that child really does have all the tools and can go back and forth, because it shouldn't have to be. So often it is, and it always has been, an either or. Well, you can have an embosser, or you can have this great note taker or Braille display that does all these other things. It really shouldn't be an either or for our kids. It really be a both. And so we are going to have a workshop that talks the different embossers. And please, if you're interested in that topic, please come. Embossers are Braille printers. You can get hard copy Braille, and there's so many things. There's books that you can Braille out. There's all sorts of stuff that your child has just as much right as the other child to have access to. Even though it's Braille, it's bulkier, it's more expensive, blah, 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 they still deserve it. And especially with proofreading and all those other things, especially if your child is younger and you really don't want to go the Braille display route, having that embosser at home will open up the world in similar ways, not other ways, because they can still do that paper Braille and they can still do that proofreading and that type of thing. So stay tuned for our National Organization of Parents of Blind Children workshops at the National Convention. We are registering people for our national convention. You can go on to NOPBC.org, and there is a way to register. You can register and have you can register for free, or you can register for $10 and get access to other resources that we have to offer. You can also register, and I would definitely recommend that you register for the National Federation of the Blind as well convention. You go to nfb.org in order to do that, and that is all free. And it's July 14th through 18th, both of those conventions. So that's my commercial. More agenda items will be forthcoming for sure, but there's going to be lots of great workshops, lots of great resources, lots of wonderful networking. It's all virtual this year, so it's from the comfort of your own home, but it's all coming up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree about the whole either or point. Having both is so crucial. So I worked for two to 3 years in like Braille production, and I produced, novels and textbooks and tests and all kinds of things. And I could not have done that work just at all without my note taker, and I could not have done that work at all without an embosser. It would have been just completely impossible, because there were so many times where what Chancey said about proofreading is so true. There's nothing like proofreading on a Braille display or note taker, just like being able to use those cursor keys, that fine feature, just having that seamless, immediate Braille. But then there would be things where there were things that would come up that no one had, at one point there was something that came up that no one had ever made before. It was this huge family tree, but it was like just humongous, and we were not at all sure how we were going to make it in a format that could go in a book, because we couldn't make it into a graphic. It wasn't an option, and I couldn't have figured out a workaround for that without embossing it out, because I would say, I think this is going to look great, and then I'd emboss it, and I was like, oh, I don't like the way that looks, and I'd go back and do it again, and I'd be like, oh, this is better, and it's exactly like Melissa said, sighted kids are able to print as much as they want, even if they don't own their own printer. They have access to them at school, they have access to them at the public library, and there's no reason the schools would never say to a sighted kid, you can have a pencil or you can use a computer. Like, they wouldn't give them these either or options that they give to our blind kids, and there's just no reason that we should accept that as enough for them.
So one of the questions was, I think, Georgie, you mentioned to me, is when to introduce Braille displays or note takers to a classroom environment.
Yeah.
And here are some thoughts that I always have about doing that. There are a couple things. One, as for when, After your child knows contracted Braille and can read fluidly, I would say would be the best time if we're talking about early learners. And because what you want to expose them to is a lot of different reading materials. And I know for me, when I was in school early on, that was a problem where I didn't have access to a diversified collection of reading materials, because Braille back then, and it still is expensive to produce. And I would argue in a lot of ways for the bigger production houses, even more expensive now to produce for larger materials. Whereas if I had access to electronic Braille in the ways that are available today with like Bookshare and other services where you can get electronic Braille, I mean, you could read huge volumes of material and really get efficient at straight reading. So as soon as your student understands how to work with literary Braille, I would say get them on a display reading. There are some other questions you might ask. So for instance, can they take the unit home? And if they can, is the home environment appropriate? Do they understand how to care for that and keep it in its case and make sure that you as parents are aware of the procedures to reinforce the behavior? And then also making sure that they stay on task. So you as the parent can make sure that they're reading, so you understand what that looks like. Even if you don't know Braille, you should at least try to become familiar with what a typical session would seem like, because kids are crafty. They'll figure out a way to kind of have a little fun, and that's okay. But we do want to make sure that they can stay on task with those devices.
Yeah, because those devices have games on them, like a lot of different games that those kids can play without you knowing that they're getting up to it. So yeah, that's a really good point, Jack. You want them to be kind of at a certain maturity level where they can understand that kind of thing. I think that they should be focused and on task. I think it's also really important and Chancey spoke to this somewhat earlier, but you don't want adding the display or the note taker to take away from the other tools they've been learning. Like this question came up last week, and I thought it was a really good example of it. A parent was asking about tactile graphics and how kids should be learning that. And I said, one of the best ways for them to get exposed to graphics is through textbooks. But if your school, if you get the note taker and then they want to put all these textbooks on the note taker, they're not gonna get exposed to tables, graphics, those kinds of things. None of those things are gonna render on a note taker. So you really do you don't want that note taker to actually end up taking other tools out of the toolbox. It needs to be put in there with the others without actually being a detriment. I mean, in my own experience, I use a note taker a lot as a kid growing up, and it was to the detriment of my learning computer skills. Like I didn't use JAWS as much as I should. My school tried to push me to do it, and I just didn't, because I use my note taker for everything. And you really need to think about that. Like, is your kid at a point that if we introduce this note taker, will they still, are we all going to still be on board for enforcing the laptop, the iPad, the hard copy Braille? All of those things need to be enforced simultaneously.
I tell my adult students,
and I would say too, oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I tell my adult students that really in the workplace and in college, you're expected to be able to do everything on everything. And so my job is to help you understand what the pain points of making those kinds of choices are. But then at the end of the day, if you're expected to be productive with a particular device or a particular method, you gotta, that's what you gotta do.
And I would say too, Chancey and Jack were talking about Nemeth a little bit on the note taker. but once you're getting into really advanced chemistry, different equations, the note taker still only has one line. So once there's a different, model that has 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or a whole page of lines, then talk to me a little bit more. I think it's nice to be able to give your teacher Nemeth that makes sense, print it out. But to me, still, I would say math on a Braille writer, thing you need to be able to line things up. You need to actually feel where things are underneath your face. So, I mean, just definitely think about that too, that yes, it's really nice to be able to do Nemeth on a note taker, but think about how often would that really be used? What would it be used for? What kind of math is your student doing? Because that's also not, I mean, I think it's fantastic that it's an option. I just don't want people to think that the Braille writer then shouldn't be an option, because again, it's tools in a toolbox, and there's just certain things that are so much nicer and much more well done just on a Braille writer, or even on a very low tech slate and stylus, in my opinion. So.
Or an embosser, back to your embosser plug, because for content that changes rapidly, like if you're getting handouts from professors or whatever, these embossers are cheaper than ever, and they can do a lot more with software. And so if you think about how fast content changes and is going to be changing, for content that's delivered remotely, the embosser is going to be another key part of that process.
So we have a question in the chat from Sarah, and this is actually a great example of the fact that I should have my display connected right now, because it'd be a lot easier for me to read this to you guys in Braille. But Sarah's basically asking about her child. It sounds like, Sarah, if you're still on here, that you're looking to get a Braille note. I'm assuming you mean a Braille note touch, but that you already have access to a display, but that you want the school to take it up to a Braille note, and you're kind of looking for how to get that happening and what to do about that. So it's kind of going back to a lot of what we've already kind of talked about a bit, but as far as getting the Braille note, I would say before you, if you haven't already done this, before you get all gung-ho on the Braille note, I would definitely try to get one in your possession and get your hands on it, because it really is a big part of the decision process, is touching, handling. I mean, not you, your child touching, handling, using the Braille note. I rushed into getting a Braille note myself, so did Melissa, and had the identical experience of, once I got it, it was, oh, this isn't what I expected. This isn't an Apex. So I would definitely, if you haven't gotten a chance to do that yet, I would try to. It might be, granted, challenging during quarantine. I'm not actually sure. Jack, do you know of anyone who is doing any kind of loaner stuff right now? That's a weird kind of question.
I don't.
Yeah.
And I would also add to that, again, it's important to think about why. If you already have access to a display, what specific reason are you needing that note taker? If it's for Nemeth and math, I would say, that's all right. But certainly from my perspective, if that student is good with their display, it's going to be, in the long term, the most flexible option.
Yeah, and and I don't, again, Sarah, if you're still on the call, because Sarah, so she mentions math. Oh, well, she says thanks. Oh, well, you're welcome, Sarah. But I know you mentioned math in this message, but it is going to come down to what you just said, Jack, with Nemeth. I could see if Nemeth is part of it, wanting the Braille note, because it is the one that interfaces the best with Nemeth, but I'm just not sure of the details. She says her child's in first grade, so she might not even be using Nemeth yet in first grade. I don't think I learned it till third, but different strokes for different folks. Everybody's learning differently nowadays. But yeah, that's a really good point.
Oh no, first graders are absolutely learning them for sure.
Good.
You would be amazed what school it's like nowadays. It's so different.
Wow.
But
That
yes,
is
we're
cool.
learning
it.
Nemeth. We're doing UEB math and Nemeth.
Good. I'm glad to hear that you're doing
has to
both.
learn UEB too.
That's okay.
Well,
That's okay.
I don't
You're
have
in a
to.
good, that's a good thing. No,
We
you
can
should do
choose in
it.
our state. So the TVI is pushing UEB because she says that's what the rest of the world uses. This is a different organization for a different Zoom meeting. But I'm like, how
yes,
about we stick with Nemeth?
it's yes.
So I said we'll talk about that next IEP meeting.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely,
I would do both.
yeah, because
I would do both. Personally.
I mean, okay. And I probably wouldn't. So I think great topic for a future Zoom meeting. Maybe we
This is
take
a
that
good,
apart.
for sure.
Yes,
Definitely.
let's talk about it. I'm ready.
Oh, Jack is revved and ready. I definitely wouldn't
we
only
talked
do
about
UEB. That would be not great. Only doing UEB without the Nemeth, I wouldn't recommend.
Absolutely.
But I do see the value in, I mean, I just always see the value in knowing more, you know? So if she's going to learn both, I think that could be really good, because there a lot of times what happens, speaking from Braille production, these math symbols from UEB math, they come up in literary text all the time. I mean, you get, you know, a character talking about an 8x10 piece of paper and there's the time sign. So they're everywhere. And I do think, you know, she's going to need to know at least the basics of both, at least have seen it and had both under her hands. And so when it comes up, she's not like completely at a loss. But Nemeth is definitely key.
Okay. So I guess we're not as far as I thought we might be. But yes, I do agree with you there. Going into the more complicated third, fourth, fifth, sixth algebra and all that. I mean, chemistry, like calculus. I mean, your daughter, I'm sure she's going to have that kind of stuff in her future. Nemeth is really go. It's much better from what I've heard and what I've seen. Even just writing it out, you know, some complicated problems, there's either no symbols at all in UEB, or it takes up, you know, maybe half of it's like a couple lines. And so just thinking about those things that, you know, kind of having that basic understanding would really push for material in them probably. That's just my bias. It's what I learned. On board with literary UEB. I haven't come as much on board with math UEB. But we can certainly talk about that in a future meeting. I think that'd be a really good one.
I agree. I think it's a great talk.
Here's a quick, if you need help with the justification in the IEP, you know, for the note taker, your child will be able to produce printable evidence, as in like print paper evidence of her work or their work. And so that is one really big benefit of these note-taking devices, is that the child can produce work in Braille and get printed output, so that a teacher doesn't have to know Braille to see the work.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you always have to be able to prove why you need it. Great. Well, let's see. It is 5:08, y'all, so we're a little bit past our time, but does anybody, I definitely want people to feel they can ask, you know, to have time for their questions. So if anybody has questions, please ask. Please, please. All right. I'm giving y'all time to unmute. I'm going to give you another 5 seconds here. Oh. All right. No questions. Jack, Melissa, did y'all have anything else that y'all want to chip in before we all sign off here?
Just everybody for joining us, and we hope that this was helpful. And please register for the National Federation of the Blind Convention and the National Organization of Parents of Blind Children Conference, which is happening during that convention, July 14th through 18th, all virtual. And our free NFB is completely free, and NOPBC is free. want access to mentoring and other resources, in which case it's only $10. Children are always free, so it's $10 per adult. So we think that's fairly reasonable, and we'd love to see you there. And thank you so much, Jack, for being here as well. This was really very
Thank you,
informative.
Jack, the tech guru. Thank you. Awesome. Well, thanks, you guys. We'll be doing an Embosser one and maybe a Braille one coming up. We'll see. We got some planning to do.
That's right.
All right.
I think though maybe our next one might be games, but
Yes,
we'll
games
figure
is
that out.
next
And
week.
so stay tuned on Facebook. Let's figure out. Oh, games is next week. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So
games is going to be,
we really look forward.
It's going to be a wide range, guys. So if you're interested in video game, like, you know, any kind of game, card games, playing games with the family, video games, computer games, we're going to cover a wide swath of games in next week's Fabulous Friday. Awesome.
Fantastic.
Good stuff.
Thank
Well,
you, guys.
thanks, guys. Thanks so much.